Most of us never set out to ruin our lives, but collapse rarely comes as a sudden blow. It creeps in through small, seemingly harmless steps. Have you ever wondered why more and more women, even those who are married, find themselves drawn into dangerous entanglements? It's not because they are weak, nor foolish, and certainly not unaware. They know exactly what they're doing, even when they pretend not to. Betrayal doesn't begin with an embrace or a night of passion. It starts with a stray message, a lingering glance, or a careless compliment. Each of these is like a pebble laid unknowingly on a path that leads straight to the abyss. 1. She doesn't feel seen. In the early years of marriage, everything seemed clear. There was presence, attention, meaningful glances, and small gestures that stirred the heart. But over time, the very things that once forged connection faded into the rhythm of routine, busyness, and unconscious living. Many women, after years in a committed marriage, begin to feel like background figures in their own lives. They still show up for dinner, still drive the kids to school, still share household responsibilities with their husbands. But deep down, they come to a quiet realization. They are no longer truly seen, not in the physical sense, but emotionally. In the connection between two souls, they will remain present, but as a function, no longer as a vibrant individual with feelings, with a need to be understood, acknowledged, and valued. The feeling of being unknown begins in the smallest of details. It might be the husband no longer noticing a new haircut, a new dress, or even the fatigue etched across her face after a long day. Questions of care become commands. What's for dinner? Take the kids to school tomorrow. Did you pay the bills? Conversations that once bridged their inner worlds, dreams, fears, joys, are replaced by task lists. Many women have confessed they feel like shadows, present yet invisible, sharing a home yet living parallel lives with a stranger. They start to question their worth in their partner's eyes, signals sent out to provoke a response. Dressing up, changing makeup, posting emotionally charged messages online often go unnoticed or ignored. And when those signals meet silence, the emptiness is not just disappointing, it feels like rejection. What's striking is that most of these changes don't happen overnight. They unearth slowly, silently, like erosion. No one enters a relationship intending to become indifferent, but familiarity, the weight of life, and daily obligations dull our emotional sensitivity. When a woman repeatedly receives no emotional response, her mind begins to ask, do I still matter? Does he still really see me? Or am I just here to keep things running? From here, the need for recognition begins to surface. But unlike men, who often seek validation through achievements and status, women tend to derive their self-worth from relationships. When she no longer feels significant to her husband, she becomes susceptible to anyone who makes her feel special, even if it is through a simple compliment or a glance of attention. The danger is that recognition doesn't need to come from someone exceptional. It can come from anyone who knows how to listen, who asks the right questions at the right time, who expresses even the smallest gesture of care. A colleague who inquires sincerely, an old friend who sends a thoughtful message, even a stranger who shows respect. Any of these can become an emotional spark. When the feeling of being noticed arises, even briefly, it forms a stark contrast with the long stretch of indifference before it. She begins to remember a former version of herself, the one who was desired, who made hearts race, who felt important. In that moment, the past feels more alive than the present, not because she doesn't love her husband, but because the mind is drawn to what makes us feel most alive. The more invisible she feels in the marriage, the more she seeks to redefine herself through the gaze of another. And if unchecked, This can lead to an emotional shift from her husband to someone else. It's not an outright betrayal, but a quiet withdrawal where she no longer shares her inner life with her partner, but with those who respond to it more fully. Another crucial point is this: the feeling of being unseen is not always obvious or easy to name. It's vague, sometimes just a sense of something missing, not being truly heard, or not being rightly valued. And because she can't name it, it becomes harder to express. The silence within grows, turning into a chasm of isolation. No one sees it, no one asks, and no one pulls her out. The irony is, in many cases, the husband doesn't realize he's creating the distance. He believes everything is fine. He provides. He's responsible. But while he functions as the manager of the household, he has lost the role of emotional companion. And when a woman feels forgotten for too long, she stays not for love, but out of duty. At that point, any outside relationship can become a dangerous substitute for the emotions long buried inside. The feeling of being unseen doesn't kill a marriage instantly, but it works like a slow corrosive, dissolving connection, companionship, and sincerity. If left unacknowledged and unrepaired, the relationship will continue to erode until one partner fully retreats, first emotionally, then physically. 2. The trap of rationalization. No one begins their day intending to destroy their relationship, but humans possess a peculiar ability to convince themselves that what they are doing is reasonable, even necessary. Psychology calls this mechanism rationalization, a way to shield the ego from guilt or inner conflict. In reality, it is one of the most insidious and silent forces behind betrayal in marriage, especially emotional betrayal. A woman may begin a conversation with another man for seemingly simple reasons. "We're just friends. I'm bored and need someone to talk to. It's fine, I've got it under control." At first, these reasons appear harmless, but the danger lies here. When repeated without self-examination, they become excuses that justify actions, progressively drifting further from her original moral boundaries. When she feels neglected in her marriage, or when emotional connection fades, attention from another man easily creates a rational gap in her mind. Rather than confront this feeling and address it at its root, many choose instead to soothe it by justifying their behavior. "My husband is distant too. I'm not doing anything wrong. I just need a little empathy." Each repetition of the act, paired with a justification, stretches the divide between action and core values. At first, she may feel uneasy, a little unsettled, realizing the conversation has grown too intimate. But after telling herself, "It's nothing, I just needed to be heard," she momentarily sluttices her conscience, and that becomes the precedent for next time. Each time thereafter, the behavior becomes easier, the self-questioning weaker, and the sense of wrongdoing fades. Rationalization is not merely a mental process. It is how one reconstructs reality to make it emotionally tolerable. Instead of thinking, "I'm drifting from my commitment," they think, "I'm rediscovering myself. I need this to stay whole." The problem is that the better we rationalize, the further we go without realizing how far we've strayed from principle. At a deeper level, this mechanism reflects the tension between one's values and actual behavior, what psychology calls cognitive dissonance. When a person sees herself as loyal and moral, but begins to act in contradiction to that belief, the dissonance appears. Instead of correcting behavior to match values, many choose to reinterpret the behavior to ease the guilt. For instance, they might think, "Loyalty means not sleeping with someone else. This is just emotional." Or, "I'm still a good wife, just a little emotionally deprived." Here lies the true danger. Instead of admitting the wrong, one redefines what wrong means. They don't break the rule. They change the rule. They don't abandon the marriage. They merely supplement it emotionally. And in doing so, they no longer recognize where they are headed or how far they have already gone. Another trait of rationalization is its cumulative nature. It doesn't strike all at once. It is a series of small steps, each accompanied by an inner explanation. Every late-night message, every deleted conversation, every kept secret, wrapped in the claim, it's not a big deal. And eventually, after enough repetition, these acts form a parallel reality, an emotional life beyond the husband's reach, governed entirely by self-justification. More crucially, rationalization erodes the capacity for self-reflection. When a deviant behavior is justified long enough, it ceases to be seen as deviant at all. At that point, the woman isn't merely deceiving others. She begins to believe what she tells herself. The truth is distorted, and in her mind, she is no longer the betrayer. She is the victim of an unhappy marriage. This mindset makes it harder to stop, because stopping would mean facing everything she has denied along the way. Rationalization doesn't just corrode a marriage, it corrodes the moral core within a person. When one can no longer distinguish right from wrong, commitment from betrayal, love from self-indulgence, every belief system becomes bendable, reshaped to serve passing emotions. The trap of rationalization lies in this. It comes not from outside, but from within. No one forces her to send messages late at night. No one forces her to keep secrets. She chooses to do so, and chooses to believe she has a good reason. That is why Stoicism emphasizes mastering thought before mastering action, because every fall begins with an unchecked thought, and when that thought is repeated, explained, and defended by internal narratives, it grows into action capable of destroying all that one once held dear. 3. Emotional addiction, the most dangerous kind. Human beings do not live by reason alone. We live by emotion. Those intricate responses in the mind and body that generate excitement, connection, or satisfaction. In marriage, emotions play a vital role in sustaining the bond between two people. Yet this is also what makes emotion one of the most dangerous addictions when left unchecked. Unlike physical substances like alcohol or drugs, emotional addiction is invisible, but its consequences can shake the foundation of a relationship. In the early phase of a marriage, emotions are intense. There is anticipation, excitement, longing, and moments of romance. But over time, these emotional peaks as two people become overly familiar, emotions no longer reach the same highs. Life settles into a rhythm, even monotony. This stability, while valuable for responsibility and security, no longer creates the kind of emotional thrill the mind once knew. At this point, many, especially women, begin to sense a void. They may not notice it immediately, but when a chance interaction occurs, a compliment from a stranger, a message from an old friend, or a lingering look from a coworker, they suddenly feel alive again. The heart beats faster, the mind lingers on the conversation, and they feel a sensation they haven't felt in a long time. Being desired. That feeling is not just sexual attraction. It is the sense of value, allure, of being activated. In that moment, the brain releases dopamine, a neurotransmitter that triggers pleasure. It's not unlike the reaction to sugar, caffeine, or drugs. The more this response repeats, the more the brain remembers it and craves returning to that state. What is unique about emotional addiction is that it requires no boundary-crossing behavior. A woman doesn't need to have an affair to feel alive. A string of secret messages, a few off-the-record conversations, a flutter in the chest when his name lights up her screen. These are enough to induce the same high as a stimulant. From there, a cycle forms: emotional high, anticipation response, satisfaction, repeat. And like any addiction, each dose demands more intensity, higher stakes, and challenges to one's moral boundaries. A common sign of emotional addiction is dependence on a specific source of stimulation. A woman may begin checking her phone often, hoping he has messaged. When there's no reply, her mood dips. Restlessness, irritation, even anger, much like a withdrawal symptom. When a reply does arrive, she brightens, feels excitement, joy. These mood swings form a psychological dependency, where emotions are no longer self-regulated, but dictated by another's behavior and responses. The danger is not only that emotional addiction creates distance from the spouse, it lies in the loss of control over one's inner life. Even without physical infidelity, all her emotional energy begins flowing towards someone else. She waits for him, thinks of him, even imagines a future with him. Meanwhile, the husband, though physically present, is gradually displaced from the center of her emotional world. Emotional addiction also leads to another consequence: disconnection from reality. A woman begins to idealize the person who made her feel alive. She remembers only the positives, exaggerates the importance of small moments, and compares them to the monotony of marriage. This comparison is rarely fair, because one side is burdened with real-world responsibilities, while the other is a fragment, unburdened and idealized under selective conditions. As emotional addiction deepens, a woman may begin changing her behavior, dressing differently, focusing more on appearance, hiding her phone, or spending more time online. These changes are not necessarily for him, but to recreate the feeling of being desired, to maintain the dopamine supply she has unconsciously come to depend on. In many cases, she doesn't even realize how this dependency is quietly harming her current relationship. What's striking is that emotional addiction is rarely treated as seriously as physical infidelity. Society tends to excuse emotional affairs or not see them as real problems. But psychologically and morally, when one withdraws all spiritual connection from a marriage to want with someone else, that is a form of betrayal. Because it happens entirely in the mind, no one else can stop it, except the person experiencing it. In the end, what makes emotional addiction especially dangerous is its subtlety, even to the one going through it. Because there is no overt action, the woman continues believing she is fine, still a good person, still within the lines. Meanwhile, the actual relationship is neglected, her values slowly eroded, and the path back to a healthy bond becomes increasingly out of reach. 4. The breaking point, where reason no longer returns. In any process of decline, whether moral, emotional, or behavioral, there exists a limit. It is the boundary between what can still be reversed and what has slipped beyond control. In the context of emotional betrayal, the breaking point is not marked by a grand act, like physical infidelity. It often comes earlier, at a far subtler moment, when the inner self crosses the final threshold of restraint without warning. When a woman enters a state of emotional drift, as previously described, the descent is not triggered by one sudden act, but by a steady accumulation of small steps. Each step seems harmless, yet each brings her closer to the point of no return. That breaking point often arrives after an action that appears trivial, a message that shouldn't be sent, an unnecessary coincidental meeting, or a touch she doesn't resist. After that moment, the internal state begins to shift noticeably. Prior hesitation is replaced by an inexplicable rush. Emotions intensive, the nervous system responds with arousal, the brain releases more dopamine, and the body registers the experience as a reward. This makes the next time easier, less hesitant, even anticipated. From a psychological perspective, once the brain links positive emotion to a certain act, it forms a reward circuit. This circuit drives a person to seek out the experience again. For someone addicted to emotion, this is the moment self-control collapses. Reason, once the guardian, is now overwhelmed by feeling. They no longer ask, "Should I?" but rather, "How can I keep going without being discovered?" At this stage, lying no longer causes inner conflict. On the contrary, intelligence is now employed to conceal. Deleting messages, locking phones, altering schedules. These are no longer moral boundaries. They are tactics. The danger is not the deceit itself, but that deceit is no longer seen as wrong. When moral convictions are blurred, any action can be justified if it brings pleasure. During this phase, a woman often stops sharing emotions with her husband. Conversations become mechanical. Emotional communication, the core of a relationship, is drained of vitality. Reason no longer guides, and her connection to her partner exists only as obligation. This deepens the divide, drawing her further into the outside emotional bond. A clear sign of the breaking point is the reversal in guilt perception. Before, the woman might feel torn, conflicted, questioning herself. But after the break, guilt is gradually replaced by a sense of power. Control shifts from self-restraint to manipulation of circumstances, hiding things successfully, deceiving with ease, living a double life undetected. The mind no longer seeks to stop. It is preoccupied only with maintaining the secret. This is also the phase where living two lives becomes reality. On one side, she is still a wife, a mother, a responsible woman. On the other, she leads a hidden emotional life where she is desired, heard, and alive in ways she feels buried in marriage. These two worlds do not intersect, but coexist within a single person. However, the breaking point never ends with emotion. Without a sharp external jolt, like being caught or a serious rupture, the descent continues. This is the inevitable result of losing inner control. When someone grows accustomed to crossing boundaries without consequence, they begin to test new limits. Every moral line, every once-held belief can be pushed further, so long as there is no resistance from within. The Stoics once likened emotions to a rushing stream. If you don't check it while it's still a trickle, it will become a flood, and by then, it's too late. In this case, the breaking point is the moment the gate of self-mastery bursts open. From that point, behavior is no longer governed by reason, but by desire, habit, and rationalizations deeply embedded in the subconscious. One must note, those involved rarely realize they've passed the breaking point. They cannot pinpoint when the boundary was crossed, because it happened gradually, quickly, and by the time they see it, what has been done to the partner, the relationship, and to themselves often cannot be undone. The breaking point is not a fall. It is the end of a long downward slope, and once there, the ability to turn back is no longer a matter of will, but of awakening, a kind of awakening few can summon unless they have reached the very bottom. 5. They don't seek betrayal, they seek themselves. Betrayal is a deeply wounding act in any relationship. It is often seen as the result of weakness, lack of virtue, or temptation. But in truth, many who walk that path do not do so with betrayal in mind. They are searching for themselves, for a version that has been lost, forgotten, or suppressed for too long within marriage. When a woman enters marriage, she often brings with her many hopes: to be loved, to be a companion, to be cherished both physically and emotionally. The early years are typically filled with positive emotions, care, attention, and fresh experience. In that period, she feels fully alive as a wife, a partner, a woman desired by her husband. But over time, that role begins to shift. Daily duties, pressure from work, children, and social obligations gradually turn her more into a responsibility executor than a free individual. She continues to fulfill her roles, but the sense of being herself begins to fade. Sacrifice, though necessary, slowly blurs the boundary between who I am and what I must do. When personal emotions are no longer nurtured, a woman begins to experience a loss, not of someone else, but of herself. She begins to ask, what once thrilled me? What did I once love to do? Am I still the woman who once captivated someone's heart? These questions are not signs of the dissatisfaction, but signals from a mind trying to reclaim its sense of aliveness. In this process of self-rediscovery, any sign of recognition, understanding, or admiration can become a powerful catalyst. A man showing concern, a sincere conversation, or a look of genuine attention can awaken emotional parts that have long lain dormant. And in that moment, she doesn't feel she is betraying. She feels she is reconnecting with a part of herself that was lost. At a deeper level, the act of sharing emotion with someone else is not a rebellion against her husband, but an effort to reclaim identity. While her husband may see her through the lens of duty, homemaker, mother, someone on the outside may see something different: intelligence, charm, depth. And that reminds her, I am not merely someone who serves a family. I am a complete person. This pursuit of self often leads her into comparison, not between two men, but between two versions of herself. The current one, exhausted, faded, bound to duty, and the former one, vibrant, radiant, full of hope. She mourns the woman she once was and longs to return to that state. The problem is, when emotions are suppressed for too long without healthy release, the clearest path seems to be toward the person who evokes that feeling, whether or not the bond is appropriate. A woman may spend days, even months, in a state of inner conflict, feeling both wrong and yet newly alive. She keeps asking, why do I need this? Yet cannot deny the hunger to be understood, to feel her personal worth. This feeling is not rooted in physical desire. It is a longing to know, I still exist as myself, not just as a role within a family system. In this context, betrayal becomes a consequence, not a goal. It is not something she intentionally seeks, but the result of a long process of disconnection, of emotional silence, of unmet needs from the person closest to her. She is looking for something that marriage was meant to sustain, but no longer does. And when she cannot find it in her partner, she starts to search elsewhere, not because she is cruel, but because she's been abandoned within her own life. This does not lessen the seriousness of betrayal, but it reveals that, in many cases, the act stems from an unmet need, a need for existential meaning. A woman doesn't want to destroy her family. She wants to feel fully alive, to be seen, heard, and loved, not as a role, but as a whole and distinct human being. When no one asks about her feelings, when no one notices the small changes, when no one truly listens, she will look for someone who does. And if that person appears at the right time, in the right way, what follows is not an immediate betrayal, but a gradual withdrawal from the current relationship. Quietly, step by step, but ever more surely. The search for self within marriage is a natural process, but when it is stifled by responsibility, pressure, and emotional disconnect, it can be twisted into harmful choices. Betrayal, in such cases, does not begin with coldness or malice. It begins with a deeply human longing to be oneself and to be loved as that very self. 6. The true nature of betrayal. Not in the act, But in the surrender within, betrayal is often imagined as a specific event, a secret kiss, a night of infidelity, or a physical act that crosses moral lines. But its true nature does not lie in that moment. It begins long before, in the fracture within. In each time, one stops conversing with themselves. In each moment, they choose silence over honesty, avoidance over confrontation. Betrayal, in its deepest form, is the gradual surrender of self-governance. When one enters marriage, they offer not only affection, but also a standard of living, a personal moral framework. Loyalty is not merely about not sleeping with another. It is the maintenance of an inward discipline, where emotions, thoughts, and actions are weighed against the commitments one has vowed to uphold. But when those inner commitments are no longer safeguarded, betrayal begins to take root. At first, the inner surrender is subtle. It may appear as the choice to stop sharing true feelings with a spouse. It begins with thoughts like, saying it won't change anything, or it's fine as long as no one finds out. These seem harmless, but they mark the moment a person ceases to fight for honest connection. They don't lie outright. They simply stop telling the truth, and that is where the fracture begins. Then comes emotional selectivity. When a woman begins to share her sorrow, joy, pain, or longing with someone other than her husband, she unconsciously redirects her inner axis outside the marriage. Physical boundaries may not be crossed, but when her heart turns to another in moments of need, for comfort, for companionship, for understanding, it reveals a shift in emotional allegiance. And in reality, the heart often strays before the body does. The surrender deepens when they no longer ask themselves, is this aligned with my values? When internal boundaries erode, behavior drifts out of control. What's critical is this: the person doesn't feel they are betraying because they still handle daily duties, still care for the children, still interact with their spouse. Betrayal unfolds in silence, without noise, without clear evidence, because it happens entirely within. The human mind is remarkably adaptive. When guilt is no longer measured against personal values, it fades. A woman might think, I haven't done anything wrong, or it's just feelings, or everyone needs to feel cared for. These thoughts aren't inherently false, but when used to justify behavior that diverges from one's original vows, they create an alternate reality where betrayal is no longer something to avoid, but something that can be rationalized. At this stage, betrayal is no longer an event. It becomes a state, a condition in which one remains in the relationship, but the soul has taken residence elsewhere. They no longer seek solutions, no longer try to heal, no longer wish to return to the intimacy once shared, because within them, a new internal framework has taken shape, one where the partner is no longer an anchor, but merely part of a routine. A key sign of inner surrender is when one no longer feels shame before themselves. At that point, any action becomes justifiable if it brings ease. They no longer seek forgiveness from others, because in their own mind they've done nothing wrong. The sense of responsibility doesn't vanish from apathy, but because the internal belief system has been worn away. Little by little, betrayal, therefore, is not an ending. It is the consequence of many small abandonments, abandoning self-reflection, honesty, and the clarity of one's own soul. A person does not betray when they act. They betray when they stop resisting the temptations within, when they allow themselves to be swept away by emotion, without erecting the walls of reason, without asking, what is right? Where am I going? What will this lead to? In the Stoic tradition, betrayal begins with the loss of internal governance. When we no longer manage our thoughts, no longer examine our feelings, no longer hold firm to our inner principles. Even without outward action, we have already entered the territory of collapse. And if left unchecked, behavior becomes the delayed echo of what has long since unraveled within. Betrayal, in this view, is not merely a sin to be forgiven or condemned. It is a signal of inner disorientation, a warning that someone has let the current of emotion steer them, rather than steering it themselves. 7. The final awakening. Every fall begins. When we forget who we are, no one loses themselves in a single moment. Misguidance is not a sudden storm that sweeps away all moral values, but a slow erosion, carried out through small decisions, lapses in self-restraint. And each time we choose silence over reminding ourselves, who am I? Each person begins with a unique value system, shaped by belief, experience, and personal commitments. Upon entering marriage, these values are further solidified: loyalty, responsibility, respect, and love. Yet over time, if not protected, this system can erode, not by external forces, but from internal neglect. Forgetting who we are doesn't happen in conscious awareness. It begins quietly, the moment we stop reflecting. When a woman no longer questions her choices, when she stops measuring her actions against the ethical standards she once vowed, when she ceases the inner dialogue and lets emotion guide her choices, that is, when the self begins to fracture. Reason is the compass that helps us navigate the complex currents of emotion. But when that compass is forgotten, emotion becomes the navigator. And emotion, though real, is not always right. Emotion does not distinguish between what should and should not be. It merely reacts to what feels alive, pleasant, or gratifying. When left unchecked, emotions pull us further from what was once essential. Forgetting who we are also manifests in how we confront ourselves. A woman who once held honesty as a virtue may begin to accept what she once condemned. First a small lie, then secret conversations, followed by denying reality to live in a world of imagined emotion. These steps not only widen the gap with her partner, they distance her from the image in the mirror, the self she once took pride in. Another sign of self-loss is the vanishing discomfort between values and behavior. Initially, misaligned actions may bring guilt or hesitation, but when those feelings no longer arise, it means the inner voice has stopped resisting. When a woman no longer questions herself after a questionable choice, no longer feels unsettled by it, her forgetfulness has deepened. Ironically, this process often feels entirely rational to the person experiencing it. She doesn't feel she's betraying anyone. She believes she is rediscovering herself, feeling alive again, or doing what she deserves. These justifications are not lies. They are the constructs of a mind no longer connected to its moral core. And once unmoored from a clear ethical compass, any act can be framed in service of current feelings. Forgetting who we are not only changes our actions, it changes how we perceive others. A woman who once loved and respected her husband may begin to view him as an obstacle. Minor flaws, once tolerated with grace, now become excuses for emotional detachment. Magnifying a partner's faults is a sign we are trying to rationalize our own behavior rather than confront it. The gravest danger of forgetting who we are is that it does not feel urgent. There is no alarm, no sudden collapse. Everything unfolds in the quiet repetition of a habit. But at some point, when she looks back, she may no longer recognize the person in the mirror. And the most terrifying thing is not being left by someone else. It is losing oneself without even noticing. In marriage, staying awake to the self is essential, not just to preserve the relationship, but to preserve one's human integrity. A person can go through cold spells, conflict, even distance. But if they remain connected to their inner principles, they can still return. Only when identity, limits, and commitments are forgotten does the path back become unreachable. Remembering who we are is not some lofty philosophy. It resides in daily choices, whether to speak the truth or not, whether to let emotion override values, whether to confront the flawed thoughts that arise. Each decision, no matter how small, reveals how awake a person is to themselves. In the end, every fall begins not with the first wrong action, but with the moment we stop protecting the self that is right. No one betray just because of one slip. Betrayal is the result of countless silences before the voice within, countless choices of emotion over principle, countless failures to ask, who am I? And how do I truly want to live? If there is one thing I've taken from reflecting on this entire story, it's this: betrayal is not a sudden act. It is the outcome of quietly drifting away from ourselves a little more each day, and that can happen to anyone. For me, living with a Stoic mindset is not about becoming flawless, but about having the courage to face myself daily, to ask the hard questions. What am I choosing? What am I moving toward? Does today's action align with the person I want to become? In marriage or in any relationship, what I've learned is the need to protect the thread of inner awareness. Don't let emotions steer you silently. Don't let boredom make you forget why you chose this person in the first place. And don't assume that unspoken words or unsent messages don't count as betrayal. I've learned to rewrite the conversation with myself every day. Each morning is a chance to renew commitment, not just to others, but to myself. Because if we can keep ourselves intact, every relationship around us stands a better chance. And if we can't hold on to ourselves, then even if we hold on to others, it's only within the hollow space of disconnection. If this message stirred something within you, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next. This isn't just a YouTube channel. It's a space for all of us to strengthen our inner lives, day by day, choice by choice. And remember, the most dangerous enemy isn't out there. It's the moment we stop living true to the person we once promised ourselves we'd become. See you in the next video.